Welcome to episode 2 of Gringo Gone Wild. I'm Rusty Johnson. Before I was an Amazon jungle guide, I was a wildlife expert. At most times had between 10 to 20 different types of animals, and I just wouldn't keep them. What I would do is I would go to different schools and universities, institutions, and teach people about wildlife. But I would actually bring the wild animals with me. Free fly a hawk or an eagle across people's heads, get 9 or 10 people up on stage and drape a good 16-foot, 200-pound python over their arms. And it was a really, really good way to get people to connect with wildlife and to get a greater respect for them. There's one thing if you see them on TV or if you see them, flying a few hundred feet up over your head. But when you can touch that animal or have that animal fly over your head and look into its eyes and see its individual personality, it creates this great connection between the animal and the audience that is really second to none. So that was always my goal whenever I do my lectures. But one evening, something really stuck with me. I was watching Late Night with David Letterman, and the guest was Jack Hanna from the Columbus Zoo. And he had a sloth with him. And he was explaining to David on how sloths will actually submerge themselves in the Amazon River, get the fur all nice and wet, and they would climb up into a tree, and with the sun beating down on them, slowly a green moss would cover their fur. And what it did is made perfect camouflage from predators such as harpy eagles and such. So if you're cruising down the Amazon in the boat, it's really, really hard to see the sloths up in the trees because they perfectly blend in with the green leaves around them. After Jack explained this, David Letterman looked at him and said, "Jack, you've never been to the Amazon, have you?" And of course the audience all burst out laughing and his face became red. And I said, "Oh my God, I never want that to happen to me." And at the time, I was lecturing with a lot of African wildlife, particularly African eagles, African tawny eagles, battler eagles, and some African pythons. So I said, "Man, this would be so embarrassing if this ever happened to me." I said, "You know what? Let me go to Africa. Give me a little bit of street cred." So kind of in the way I do my things, just doing it on a whim, decided to go to Africa. So I went to Kmart and bought a pup tent there. And at the time, I had some good connections with African Wildlife Organization down in Johannesburg. I did a lot of fundraisers for them up here in the States. And so I made the connection down there, said I wanted to go to Africa. So I flew down there. I rented a Land Cruiser, and I did a 3,000-mile trek through 5 countries in southern Africa. And that's where I could then come back and say, you know what, I've been to Africa, I've seen these animals in the wild, I've seen how they behave. And it would just add a little bit extra something and credibility to my programs. But the trip enlightened me in so many ways I did not expect. One thing I quickly learned about Africa is that nothing is predictable, nothing stays the same. It's always in a constant flow of change, which is something that is hugely exciting and interesting on that continent. On one particular occasion, I was crossing the border from Botswana into Zimbabwe and had to go through customs. That was extremely enlightening. I pulled the Land Cruiser over and I had to walk into the customs building, and I'm in a big, big line because they weren't tourists. They're actually a lot of the locals there will go from Zimbabwe to Botswana or vice versa for work, but they still have to hit the customs before that. They go and when they return. But I'm sitting there as the only tourist and trying to get through to Zimbabwe. So I get up to the customs agent, and he asked what I'm doing. I said, "Well, I'm just filming and viewing wildlife and stuff." So he starts checking my bags, checking my documents. One mistake I made was that he noticed that I had a plane ticket in my bag for me to leave Zimbabwe 3 or 4 days later, which sounds like no big deal. But what that meant to him was that he knew that I had to get to Zimbabwe because I had to catch that plane in a few days. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So he knew he was able to take advantage of me to allow me to get through. So suddenly he says, "Well, what we have here is we have a new tax. Since you're bringing the car into Zimbabwe, in this Land Cruiser, you have to pay an extra tax. And I said, man, I never heard that before. I knew he was trying to bribe me. I knew he was trying to pull something over on me. So he said, no, it's an extra tax. I said, well, when did this law take place? He goes, oh, no, it just started. It's very, very new. But you have to pay $300 to get through. And I knew it was a bunch of BS. And I kind of argued with him about it. I said, listen, I know that's not the case. Just stamp my passport, let me through, and I'm going to be on my way. So he said, no, you have to pay the $300. I said, no, I don't. I know what you're trying to do, and just let's continue on. I'm the only tourist here. I know you're trying to take advantage of me. And he insisted, no, it's a law. You have to pay it. You have to pay it. I said, well, let me speak to your superior. He said, okay, fine. So understand the custom agents and custom offices are not like they are in the United States or European countries. This was extremely, for lack of a better word, rustic, let's say. Very tiny office. But he takes me back behind the building, up this tall, dry hill, and to where it's I don't want to say it's a shack. It's just cinder blocks with even no roof on it. And I walk in, and there's a guy in a military uniform and another guy in just civilian clothes. And they're playing checkers with beer caps and beer bottles all over the place. And he makes the introduction that this is his superior. So I said, listen, I said, I know that there's no $300 tax to get my car through. I said, I know the guy just saw my plane ticket. He knows I have to get through, and the guy's just playing me. I said, come on, let's be honest. While I'm saying that, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, Rusty, what are you doing? Just shut up. You are in the middle of Africa. There's an AK-47 just leaning up against the wall. He could shoot me in the head, throw me in a ditch, and believe me, nobody would be looking for me. And that would be the end of it. So he said, nope, it's a new law, and that's what it is. And at this point, I'm getting kind of pissed about it. But I know, wait, I'm in their territory. I'm a visitor. You got to play the game. This is Africa. So I said, listen, how about this? Just be honest with me. Okay, I'm not an idiot. I know that there's not a law that I have to pay $300 tax to get this car through. I said, just be honest with me and say, okay, sir, we're screwing you over. You have to pay $300 because I want it, and it's the only way you're going to get through. And out of a huge surprise, he turns to me and he says in broken English, yes, sir, we're screwing you over. If you want to get into Zimbabwe, you're going to have to pay $300. And I was kind of shocked at that point. I said, all right, well, thanks for your honesty. And went back down to the office, paid out the $300, and got into Zimbabwe. And that's how Africa is. I accepted it. I told the guy, well, if you ever make it to the United States and I run into you, I'm going to find some damn tax that you're going to have to pay. But I'm on your land now, so I'll respect that and play the game. So then I go on my way. And after driving for some time, I see really, really far off of the horizon this looked like smoke. Just looked like there was a wildfire or something. And it just seemed different, though. It wasn't dark smoke. It was just seemed to gleam a little bit, And when I got closer and closer, I'd look and actually see a rainbow in it. And then I realized it was Victoria Falls. So I'm like, oh, sweet. And let's go check out Victoria Falls. So I'm cruising along, and it's very, very, kind of back road-ish, tight dirt roads. Tree lines are right on each side. And as soon as I turn this corner on this dirt road, next thing I know, I just see back end of an elephant right in the middle of the road. And I slam on the brakes. And as soon as I slam on the brakes, he whips around and faces me, throws his ears way, way out to the side as wide as he can, and he starts swinging his trunk back and forth and trumpeting. He must have weighed at least 10,000 pounds. At this point, I'm about 20 foot away from him. So I figured what I'd do is I'd just kind of push the car along up. Figured the car was big enough to spook him a little bit. So as I kind of revved my engine and slowly got closer and closer, he did not back down. He came right straight to me till we were literally just inches away from each other. So I just stopped there, put it in neutral, and waited to see how he would react. What he started to do is he'd feel the hood of my car with his trunk, touch the windshield wipers, and touch the windshield, and he wasn't budging. He obviously seen cars before, and he was not afraid whatsoever. I could actually see that he was, quote, right-handed, because these enormous tusks, but the right tusk was worn down a lot more than the left one. So that's the one that he uses most. Now I'm kind of in a little bit of a freak out mode because this animal would have no problem of flipping this cruiser right over. He was fearless, or at least appeared to be. Standing about 10 foot at the shoulder, getting a closer look at him while he investigated my car, I could tell that he was a male, which I don't think I have to explain too much on how you figure out if a male elephant's a male. So that gave me one hint of what to do. See, there's a big difference between the male and the female elephants. A male elephant is actually extremely timid. When they have their ears way out to the side and they're trumpeting and swinging that trunk around, a lot of times that really is just a bluff. You could throw a stick at them about the size of a pencil and hit them in the forehead with it, and they'll turn tail and run. Now, don't do that with a female. You try hitting a female with a stick, she's going to freight line you and crush you to death. But when I saw it was a male, I figured, well, it's going to be a little bit timid. Even though it has the ability to pick up my car and flip it over or roll it down the road like a marble, I didn't think he'd do it. So after he's kind of getting a little pushy, what I did was just honk my horn, would startle him a little bit, but I actually opened up my door, which I felt was something he wasn't used to. Even though he sees cars go by, most people just stay in the car. And as soon as I opened up my door, I could tell that startled him, and he just quick turned around and started trudging away and went right back into the forest and disappeared. And as soon as I caught my breath back, I just continued along the road, getting closer and closer to Vic Falls. While I was riding down the road, I was really just thinking about that elephant. It was just so immense. When you're right up next to them, it's just really, they're absolutely mind-blowing. And just what an incredible animal they really are. As he investigated, the hood of my car and my windshield wipers, it's almost like that trunk had its own mind. There's about 150,000 muscles in an elephant's trunk. They can smell water for miles, and they actually communicate too. I remember a lot of times that I've had experience hanging out with African elephants that were in captivity. I remember this incredible time when I was actually standing right between two African elephants, arm's length away. They were tame. And I'm petting one with one hand and petting the other with the other hand. And they're just sitting there and hanging out. And suddenly they just sat still for a minute. And I saw this slight vibration on the front of their face. And it kind of caught my attention. And right when it caught my attention, I literally could feel my ribs starting to vibrate. But I heard nothing. And what they were actually doing were talking to one another, but they talk subsonically. The human ear cannot pick it up. And they were just right next to each other. Out in the wild, they can communicate subsonically from miles away. This is just a truly incredible animal that really, it's exciting when you see him in captivity, but when you kind of going face to face with one in your car, it really gets the adrenaline pumping. So as my mind wandered about elephants in general, I could see Vic Falls getting closer and closer. This beautiful shimmering, just like thousands of diamonds in the sky with the sun shining. And what it is the mist coming up off of the falls. Actually, the Vic Falls has a nickname of the smoke that thunders. So I just kept moving along. I really could not wait to get a good close look. Now, as I'm driving, the environment is very, very sandy, kind of this like scrub brush around. All the trees seem very, very dry. The soil is very, very dry. And As soon as I approach Victoria Falls, there's a little place where I can pull the Land Cruiser to the side of the road, and I got out and I started walking towards there. And what was the most interesting part with that was that mist that is constantly billowing up from Victoria Falls goes hundreds of feet in the air and then slowly falls back down to earth. And what it ends up creating is this small circle of rainforest around it, to where you have this dry, almost desert like environment. And then literally take two steps and you're in what would be equivalent to a rainforest. And it's simply a different ecosystem that is totally being fed by the falling mist of Victoria Falls. These tropical birds are flying around through the leaves. Vervet monkeys are hopping through the trees. One really was funny. He kind of looked like a butler. As soon as I walked in this small path, there was this little vervet monkey, and he's just standing there looking at me. And as soon as I start walking down the path close to the falls, he kind of starts leading the way. And I said, all right, buddy, take me where I need to go. And I'm following this monkey, only about 2 foot in front of me. Every once in a while, he's looking back at me, having no fear whatsoever. And just as soon as I got almost right up next to the falls, he hops up into a tree, kind of just like to say, ta-da, here it is. And bam, here's Victoria Falls. Really one of the most incredible sights I've ever seen in my entire life. You couldn't even speak if you had someone next to you because of the heavy roar of the falling water. Hence the name, The Smoke That Thunders. The falls themselves are about a mile wide. And what makes it so interesting is that it's fed by the Zambezi River. Now, from above, or from the other side of the falls, if you see the Zambezi, it is a very slow-flowing river, almost glass-like. And then suddenly it takes this violent 300-foot plunge down into this small pool. Literally, you can feel the vibrations just shaking your skin. In every direction, rainbows would fade in and fade out. And when you got real close, the blowing mist would just fill up your eyes. You constantly had to wipe your eyes away just to even see the falls. And that's when I was really right next to that smoke that thunders. 25 miles away in any direction, you can see this billowing cloud of water that is just shooting straight up into the air. The Zambezi is the fourth largest river in Africa. It's about 1,650 some miles long, and it flows through Angola and western Zambia. It forms the border of Botswana and separates Zimbabwe and Zambia. And it's a great dilemma of speaking about Victoria Falls, because when you get up next to it, there's really not words to describe what you're seeing. It's really just something you have to go and see. Even right now, I'm trying to even reach for words to really describe what it was like. But it was like a time warp, where just by several feet, you're going to this dry scrub brush type land to bam, you're in a rainforest. And when you're watching it, you feel like, okay, I'm in a rainforest. But then when you decide to walk away from Victoria Falls, which seems almost impossible, you just want to sit there and watch it forever. But when the time comes and you need to walk away, it literally is only a couple hundred feet through rainforest, and then you're back in the dry scrub brush again. Gazing at Victoria Falls is hypnotic. Just the explosiveness of it deafens all conversations, and it just forces you just to be silent and watch and just inhale her mist and just absorb her beauty. She just demands respect. My visit to actual Victoria Falls was just really the tip of the iceberg of what I experienced within the city of Victoria Falls. In part two, that will be coming soon, I'll explain an incredible time I had with 3 children who ended up being orphans in Victoria Falls and living in the streets, and how they'd fight every single day because they lost their entire family. And unfortunately, it was all due to AIDS. In Zimbabwe and surrounding areas, about 1 in every 3 people do have AIDS. And these 3 poor girls lived in the streets because they lost both their parents and grandparents, uncles, aunts, all to AIDS, and they had nobody. And these are children that are below 10 years old. fighting for survival. And I met them and enjoyed their company, learned so much about how they have to survive, and did my best to help them any way I can. And that'll be in part 2 of this podcast, which will be coming soon. Thank you so much for listening. Please visit my website, gringogonewild.com. Subscribe so I can give you a heads up when part 2 comes out. And I hope you enjoy. Stay tuned.